What is up, guys? This is actually a very fun thing for me to do, which is kind of showing you guys through Bias Effects, which is an online, basically a guitar amp modeler where you can add guitar pedals, which is really cool. Showing you guys through this how I would go about getting different guitar sounds. And I just, it seems actually a good idea to make a series out of this or something. That would be a really cool thing. So right now we're going to be doing Richie Sambora and You Give Love a Bad Name, that intro, right? That huge intro, which you'll see a clip of right now. Here we go! Just sounds awesome, right? It's just, laden with he just has that core sound of just like that 80s shred. We kind of want to get there, but not too far there. We don't want to get too shreddy in 80s. But this is basically the first preset that always loads up whenever I load up Bias Effects. It's probably my favorite. It's the Marty Friedman. It sounds really good, and this is really what I use a lot if I'm going to practice, if I'm going to be recording a guitar solo for whatever reason, or I'm just jamming on backing tracks, or I need to record something really quick. That's like my go-to preset every single day of the week. I tweak it a little bit though, where maybe the treble's up or whatever. So how you see it is basically how I like to use it. Another thing also is that I don't always use the stock guitar cabinets. In this case I will be, because I'm just using the standalone application and it just makes it easier. But usually if I'm recording something that is my guitar ideas or whatever, I use my own guitar impulses that I bought third party or whatever. So I might use like the Own Hammer. I know Own Hammer has the Mesa 4x12, I think it's a slant cabinet for free, which is a really good, impulse response if you want one for free. Now, we want something very much in this kind of realm of definition, clarity, 80s, which means we need a different guitar sound, and just something that kind of just gives you a smooth lead sound. Okay, it's not like a modern gent sort of sound, where it's like whatever, it's more of this kind of 80s sort of sound. Now, when I think of 80s, I think of George Lynch from Dokken, I think of Sambora, I think of Eddie Van Halen. These guitar tones that are just shrill, just a little bit more shrill. So that's kind of what we need to go for. Now, before I talk about what I decided to settle on, let's look at his actual equipment. This is a website called Equipboard. I don't know. I'm not endorsed by any of these things, so it's a it's hit or miss. But in this case, it's helpful to give an illustration on what the actual guitar player uses, and this kind of gives us a rough idea. So looking at his guitars, he has all of these guitars that he's used or has used or continues to use. I've seen that Ovation double neck a lot because he uses it for Dead or Alive, and I think I've seen the Fender double neck, but in the video, the live video in Madison Square Garden, he uses this guitar. There's something very particular about it, is that it has two humbuckers and it has a Floyd Rose. The Floyd Rose actually gives a different tonal character to the guitar. That's already more mid-rangey and more treble bass. Whereas if you have something like a stop tail or a hardtail guitar, it tends to be a little bit more resonant and a little bit more low end and sustain. So just some things to think about. So really, ideally, we just need a guitar with humbuckers. And I'm going to be using this 2008 Epiphone Les Paul. This is my own personal Les Paul that I bought in 2008. And I used it for a long time for learning and everything. And you could buy these used now probably for like $350, maybe $400 at the most. You know, it's just to illustrate that even though I do have more expensive guitars now that I'm older, I'm not going to use it because I don't need to. You can use any guitar, essentially, to be able to get this, as long as the pickups are roughly, okay and clear. And as long as you can play the damn thing, that's also a very important thing. Before we get into bias effects, let's look at some other things he uses. Amplifiers wise, Marshalls, Diesel, VHT Pitbull, Friedman Brown Eye, which is kind of what I decided to go for. I was like, I want that Marshall saturatedness of a Friedman. The Friedman amps are just like, to me, the pinnacle sound of rock and roll. It's not too modern, but it's not too classic, if that makes any sense. It's just a hot-rodded, just a badass amplifier that just sounds awesome. So it's kind of like a JCM 2000, really. Let's just leave it at that, okay? It's basically a Marshall. If you want to get a good sound, just get a Marshall at this point. But if you're after the boutique and you want something that just does the job over and over and over again, makes you fall in love with guitar sounds, Friedman Brown Eye, man. That's it. Effects pedals, I'm going to be focusing on 3. The chorus pedal, it's such a staple of the 80s. The Klon Centaur is such a staple of guitar players where if you need a solo boost or clarity, that's it. And if you need an octave pedal, the Micropog or the Pog if you can afford it. So if I was going to use real life scenario, like I needed to use pedals and an amp and all that, I could use this guitar, sure, but with the amp I would prefer a tube amp, simply because it takes pedals a little bit better than any solid state amp that's out there or any modeling amp that's out there. It's all about getting the circuitry of the tubes just like really nice and saturated. And it tends to take pedals very well. So even if you do get a cheap tube amp, like a Monoprice, whatever, like the 15 watt that I know they're always sold out of, or the Blues Junior, or the Fender Hot Rod Deluxe, or the Hughes and Kettner Tube Meister, or the VHT, I forgot what it's called now. Any sort of tube amp that's at least a good starting platform is good to go. And then you would probably need to buy a distortion pedal. Well, what kind of distortion pedal would you get? I would highly recommend the Friedman BE for anyone. And that's because I've had mine for over a year, and it's saved my butt so many times that I can't live without it. Like, it's that good of a pedal. So I keep it on my pedal board at all times. It's going to be Velcroed there. That's the spot. It's there. And the reason for that is because it transforms any amp into basically a fire-breathing dragon of an amplifier, where it doesn't matter how clean it is, doesn't matter how it sounds or anything, you can really tweak it in, and it just instantaneously transforms that amplifier to be something that I like. So I would use that. You can use a Tube Screamer or a Klon clone. You can use a cheap chorus pedal, and then if you can afford it, you should get an octave pedal. Octave pedals are super handy. You know, at least to me, if you're a single guitarist in a band and you need a fill out sound, that's the best way to do it. It's basically like doubling your guitar sound. So a micropog, sure, if you can afford it, get it. But you know, that's neither here nor there. So that's the basis of what I would use in a real life scenario. You know, so if I was to focus on stripping that down even further, it would just be a gainy amp and an octave pedal and maybe some delay or reverb in the effects loop. But really, to get that intro, you kind of need the octave pedal. You don't have to have it, but it is there, right? So that's what Richie Sambora uses. So let's go to bias effects, and let's go to my preset right here, Sambora, that I actually already have set up. And this is basically where I started at. So let's turn everything else off. And this is the amp that I got. So this is a Friedman BE that I found on the Tone Cloud thing that somebody else had used, and it sounds great. So this is the core fundamental sound. You can see here in terms of gain, it's not that high. It's around 6 or 7. I lowered it a little bit, 7.5, I guess. The bass is actually lower than 5, so it's below 12 o'clock. It's like like almost 9 o'clock or whatever. Mids are higher, treble is higher, and the presence is lower. I like to keep the presence lower just because it smoothens out that top end. And then the master volume in this case is all the way up. A real life scenario, just keep the bass lower, middle higher, treble around the middle. And if there's a presence control, you can lower that down. You don't need to push the amp all the way up. You don't need to have the gain all high either. So really, if you're going to be using a cleaner amp, you're going to get most of that sound from the distortion pedal. If you are going to be using the amp, you definitely want to push that amp already with gain. So in this case, here's the difference between a lower volume with high gain, right? And then here's a volume all the way up. It's just pushing that power section more, really saturating the tubes. So it's just a very full sound. So, you know, if I was recording an album or whatever, that's pretty much where I would leave it. And you can see it's staying on 10. It's not going anywhere. Let's keep that right around there. Okay, so then the next pedal I added was the overdrive. And here's the settings for the overdrive. The gain's relatively low. Okay. The treble is definitely past 12 o'clock to give us a mid-hump. And then the output is right around here, around 10 o'clock. So then this is what that sounds like. So you can see it's not pushing the front end of the amp a lot. It's just kind of giving us more clarity. Then after that, I have the octave pedal. And the octave pedal, I have it set to the higher octave because I think it sounds better than the lower octave. So I play the low octave. Okay, and it sounds pretty cool. Then I added in the chorus, and here's the settings for that. And you can see the rate's really low with the high width, so it gives us this kind of stereo sound and not a lot of intensity. So it's just there just to kind of give us more breathiness. And here's what that sounds like. That sound reminds me a lot of like Alex Lifeson. And then we can go into the delay. And this is the settings for the delay. The level's pretty low. And this deluxe delay I think is based off like the Memory Man. And you can see that it has a chorus vibrato kind of modulation thing. It's set pretty low. And the delay time is like 400 milliseconds. Yeah, like 420, 401 or whatever. Somewhere around there. And just a lot of repeats here. So this is what that sounds like. Right, oh, let me turn it on. There we go. So it's got a long delay tail. So this sounds like this. So once you get into that rhythm section, I would probably turn these two off, leave the delay and the stereo chorus on, and it sounds like this. And you can see the amp's got plenty of gain there. So if I was setting up that distortion pedal, it would be so that way I have this rhythm sound that even if I wanted to play harder, or I just wanted to turn the guitar up to 10, I've already got basically almost like a lead sound. And then once I add the pedal, the overdrive, it just gives me even more kind of... And then when I turn that off, it's still... You know, it's still really saturated. And that's because in this case, we have the amp turned up to 10, which I would never do. Okay, I'd never have the amp turned up to 10 in a real life situation, except maybe in the idea of recording. But even then, I probably wouldn't do it. So definitely, the core sound, just get a guitar with humbuckers, get an amplifier, whatever you can afford or whatever you can get that has a cool gain sound, or you get a distortion pedal, so that way you can drive that amp, so those two go together. Then you have your octave pedal, okay? If you can afford one, hopefully there's a cheap one out there. I don't know what it would be, but you would want an octave pedal that can go up and down. If not, then you're kind of stuck with the low. And so let's look at what that sounds like, okay? So here's the low octave, okay, if I was to play it higher. Okay, now if I turn it on, yeah, it sounds okay. It sounds alright. It's workable. So if you could get just a low octave pedal, Boss has an octave pedal which works perfectly fine. But I kind of like the sound of... I think the higher octave just sounds better to me. But whatever works, whatever's cheaper. And then a Tube Screamer clone. The cheapest clone I can think of is the Electro Harmonic Soul Food. That will definitely help you get there. But another alternative that is really, really good is the Wampler Tumnus. And if you can't afford that, you know, you might also maybe would want to look at like the J Rocket Archer, which is still too expensive, or the BYOC, to build your own clone. Silver Pony is what I have on my actual guitar board, and I basically have it set like this with maybe the output up a little bit depending on the amp. But this is really where I kind of like to set this pedal, because it takes an already great sounding amp, like in this case, you know, and then it takes it to another dimension. that is it. That covers everything I can talk about this subject. I might do another one of these because I just figured out that I can do this. This is really cool. You know, I think this would actually be a great series to do, where I just kind of try and replicate guitar sounds using bias effects or whatever I have at my disposal, just to give you this sort of idea of how to get these guitar sounds, how to dial these in, my methodology or whatever, maybe some recommendations. I think the next one I would probably do, if that's the case, is the intro for, what is the name of that song? I'll put it right here. It is one of, yeah, this song. So I would probably do this as a video on how to get this guitar sound, because I think it's one of the coolest sounds ever, at least for the intro, and that would be cool to do. It would be educational for you guys as it was educational for me. Rodriguez Lopez will probably be next in terms of guitar sounds. So hopefully this was helpful to you. If you have any questions, by all means ask, or recommendations, by all means ask. And thank you very much. Have a good one.